Hello, me. I am using Fathom events, Fathom note-taking to keep track of things. This is our first Datocracy meeting in a few months, I think probably April, and it is good to be here, even if it's just me. Many things happening on in my life, somewhat Datocracy related. The big one, I don't know if it's big, but it was fun for me, is I published a short story just on my blog for Twitter called Molly's Life Thesis. Hello, Tom.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to make it, but my iPhone just wouldn't hook up to anything. But I reset the thing and then it would hook up. I don't know why it does that.
We got a little bit of a lag here, so it's a bit weird looking, but
Oh, yeah.
You said you had a sail regatta?
Yeah, there was, there's one sailboat right there. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Could you see the sailboat?
Yes.
Yeah, we're on the Oslo fjord here. So this is my inspiring summer cabin.
That's nice.
So this is the one day in the year where 1,000 ships sail by, quite literally, in their regatta or race. And I thought for the longest time that they had just grabbed all the bandwidth. But then I checked my wife's and my son's, and they had bandwidth anyway. So I said, something's wrong here. And I just tried a simple reset and I was back online.
Yay. So it may just be us. I don't know if anyone else was going to actually try and show up, but happy to catch up with you. Just to give you up to speed, the last time we met, I was working on the IGWET app for Ernest. I can share my screen and show you.
Yeah, tell me about that. I don't recall. I recall hearing about it, but I don't know anything about it.
So Ernest is a prolific writer, but he doesn't like publishing. And so he was, so we used a...
Well, I sympathize with him there. I sympathize with him there.
Last I checked, you seem to publish a lot.
Yeah, but I don't like publishers.
Publishers is one thing, yes. And so we use a tool called Fleep, which is kind of like an open version of Slack. It's free, anyone can join, and they have an API. And so he and I have had, a variety of conversations over the years, going back years. And he was saying, well, instead of trying to get onto Twitter, which has so many issues, what if we could just publish directly from Fleet? And so the idea was, I've tried different things, but the short answer is I created a page on my website, which is all these Fleet conversations. And so not the most elegant UI, but not horrible. We can write things directly onto a Fleet chat. So I could say, Zoom call, and with some latency, it'll show up. Yeah, so I don't know how long it takes to wend its way through the Fleet thing. Maybe by the end of our call, we'll see it there. So anyway, this was like, so this is now like a public thing, and he and I can have conversations here, and then they're showing up on the internet and they're searchable by Google, and you can attract other people. And this give us sort of an alternative to Twitter or Google groups or whatever as a way to have conversations in public. So that was really kind of a small hack, but it was an interesting one. Hello, Ernest.
Hello, Ernest.
And then the other thing we talked about back in January was, just like I got up page 4, that I talked about how, I love Valplan in a lot of ways, but it's, very locked in. And so the idea is that I can create a documents page off of here, which has hyperlinking and versioning, and use that to store our manifestos and objectives and things like that. So that's on the back burner, nothing much has happened with it, but at least I've delivered something this year, which is not a small thing. So grateful for that. Hello, Ernest.
Hey.
I was just giving him the Fleet demo.
I also gave him a view of the Oslo Fjord at my summer cabin.
Oh,
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah. That's living.
yeah, I see. Jealous.
Anything new on your side you wanted to share, Ernest?
Anything new? No, I'm here.
Yeah, now we have Fleet. We have to find something to talk about. But
Yeah.
I think we have, at least I've been posting a little bit about cryptography, reverse the order. So, and I think it shouldn't be that hard to add images, but it'll take a little while. I did want to give a shout out to Tom's book. Someday I'm going to come up with a question that you won't be able to answer by. I've written a book on that, but until that day, we will.
My backup is, and I do it often, is I will write you a paper by the next day.
Is this the same regatta, by the way?
Yeah, it's exactly the same place. That's that's one level above where I am now on the sort of a balcony of the cabin, but you're looking out at the Oslo Fjord there. So
What's the
there's the same. Let's see, is that the same? Yeah, that's the same. Can you see the lighthouse?
yeah?
Same
No.
lighthouse.
Below your hand?
A hand. Oh
You're
dear.
saying, sorry, from the screen, from the Zoom call, I can see the captain's.
Oh yeah, no, I was trying to show
Oh, you
you
have the same
lighthouse.
T-shirt on.
Yeah, this is my. I just got it back from my London. We're cleaning out my London flat, and this was there. And some of my pupils gave it to me because they. I used to joke about, well, your first estimate should be 42.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We're actually, we're after 30 years, we're selling my London flat, which I've had, and it's served me well and the family well. But it's at my age, it's time to stop owning stuff because you have to take responsibility for it and do things all the time.
Mhm.
And it's time to cash it in and give it to the heirs.
One of my favorite things my parents ever did for me is 10 years ago, they sold our childhood home and got rid of all the junk, donated it to museums and things like that.
Right.
And
That's
so
what we're
that we
doing.
don't have to face that in their future when they.
Right. Well, that's part of what we're doing. We're cleaning it up while we're still young enough to do it at our early 80s. So we just 6 gigantic suitcases have been brought home by various people.
Wow.
So
That's cool that we got the same T-shirt there. So I have to say, I mostly just looked at the cartoons, which was
hey, good. Yeah.
I think this is actually probably a good screen to focus on, because the first part is more or less the same theme level of the book Designing Your Life that I was talking about from the guys at Stanford, the Life Design Lab, right? Do stuff, most fail, some works, do more of what works, and then you do something. If it doesn't, then you do something else. Is that really a Da Vinci quote? The trick is the doing something else?
I hope so. And if it isn't, please let me know. I once made the mistake of doing an Einstein quote. There wasn't an Einstein quote. Have you heard that story?
No. So he has, it's interesting. The one you quoted here, linked here, was a Tom Peters, attributed to Tom Peters, interestingly enough.
Yeah. Tom Peters, yeah, oh, now that's interesting. I don't know. I know how
Tom
to follow
Peters,
that.
Leonardo da Vinci, you know, it's close enough.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to check that. I will take responsibility for checking that out.
Maybe they moved it after you added it. But I thought the interesting thing was, so the book that you're
So
reading,
you're not going to ask me about the Einstein quote, are you?
okay, I'll ask you about the Einstein quote.
Things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yes, as simple as possible, but no simpler. Yes, and you're saying that that wasn't Einstein?
Well, I bought into it and I put it in my 1988 book on page 17 and called it, Einstein said. And then people began to question it. And what we found was nobody could prove that he ever said it with any documentation, although he said things sympathetic to it. It was sympathetic simplification.
Yeah.
And I even had contact with Alice Calabrese, who had access to all of his Princeton files and wrote the Einstein quotation book. And she put it in her chapter called Things That People Think Einstein Said, but I Can't Prove It.
Yeah.
So, but you want to hear the fun of the story is I was at this cabin and I pulled out a book I'd read halfway by Marvin Minsky, heard the name?
Oh, yeah.
Called Society of Mind, I think it is, from memory.
Oh, yeah.
And there was this Einstein quote. So I looked him up, found an email. I mean, he must have been within 3 years of dying of old age. And I wrote him an email. I said, do you realize that nobody can prove that Einstein said this? And he said, well, that's interesting. When I made my first trip to Israel, they met me at the airport. And the first thing they asked me was, could you prove that Einstein quote? Remember, they wanted Einstein to be the president of Israel once. He was held in high esteem there.
Yeah.
And he said, well, no, I just thought everybody knows he does it. And they said, that's not so. And then he wrote me an email and he said, you know, Tom, I used to take long walks with Einstein. I have a personal email from the man telling me this, by the way. I've got it here in my computer now. And he said, I used to take long walks around the campus of Princeton with Einstein. And I think he said something similar, but his German accent was so guttural, I'm not quite sure. I actually have that email. That's a good story, huh?
Yeah, that is great. So you hung out with Minsky. That's another little juicy gem there.
Yep.
Nice. So anyway, before we get completely sidetracked, so anyway, just give a shout out to my friends at Stanford for the Bill Burnett and Dave Enns, Designing Your Work Life. I think the interesting difference between your book and the Stanford book, they're very similar in a lot of ways. They probably spent a little bit more time getting a publisher than you did for obvious reasons. Is your book feels a bit like an engineering exercise because of all the spreadsheets and the numbers.
It is. It is a conscious attempt to use engineering logic to do life planning, although I have simplified it considerably compared to my other works.
Yes. And what's interesting is that it does, this is a topic that I've been kind of wrestling with and ranting about lately, is sort of this tension between, let's call them puzzles, and what I like to call challenges. And this gets back to one of my favorite words to beat up, which is the word problem. Since we're talking about origins, do you know where the word problem came from?
No.
Pro must mean for, and lem must mean something else, like for consideration or thinking. I'm just guessing.
Clever, but yeah, I should probably look up, I guess I should, rather than spouting something from memory, we should look up the, we have all these things. Yes. some per forward and well throw or problema. Question. So I believe it was right. Oh, so it doesn't necessarily go here, but it has the origin of it. But I believe it was invented by the monasteries when they were in the process of turning into universities.
Okay.
They would create an exam, and then when you had an exam, it was the thing posed to you, which you would have to come back to. It's 14th century. It wasn't the original Greeks. It was the scholastics, as we now call them, working with it. And the thing that's interesting to me, it gets back into my rant. Oh, good. I don't have any books, but I have a blog post for everything, which I can quote here since we're playing that game. And let's see if I can find it. I'm sharing my screen again. Did I stop sharing it? So I'm not telling you. Right. This is so I was, hearing a bunch of my friends at Harvard talking about the liberal arts education and the value of liberal arts education. And every decade or two, Harvard will revamp their curriculum, and there'll be a huge hue and cry from the traditionalists that they're ruining Harvard, but they keep marching along. And this was in 2008 when they did this. And what was interesting is that they kind of articulated that their goal is to create a cultural elite, right? The people who would run civilization or run society. And it's funny, like that used to be the only goal, such that I've heard that the smarter you were, the less money you would make, right? The geniuses would go on into politics and public service, and the losers would go on to make millions of dollars. And that has changed since the era of the yuppies and the 1990s and so forth. But still the idea that they're creating the masters of the universe. And the funny thing about going to MIT or a technical engineering education is it's still kind of a slave mentality. Your job is to be given problems and then solve them. And certainly when I was there in the 80s, people were starting to question that with the end of the Cold War and things like that. But there's definitely a sense in which our job as engineers is to be problem solvers. Someone gives us a problem, our boss, the product manager, the teacher, whatever, and you just keep your head down within that box and solve it. And I was really thinking, like, what would it take to do things differently? And so the idea of trying to teach people how to be the master of their own fate, right? And thinking about the system as a whole. And a big part of that is so everyone says we want to teach kids problem solving. We shouldn't just teach them math or just teach them logic. We teach them to solve problems. And like my rant is that, like, no, I think that's the wrong framing. Even designing your life, which, and I think this may or may not be deliberate on that part, because it is a thing. Well, they say, well, design is about solving problems. And that was the one thing I fundamentally disagreed with in terms of their choice of language, even though I think their intent is probably the same as what I'm saying, is that life is not like a problem on a test where there's one yes or no answer. And I don't think you would say that either. It's like a challenge. It's like this big amorphous space where there are better and worse answers with different long-term and short-term trade-offs. But the hard part is actually picking and understanding the right problem. Or even understanding it's not even a problem, it's an opportunity. Or there's a speaker, preacher, Andy Stanley, who says, there are some things which are not problems to be solved, they're tensions to be managed. And if you solve it one way or the other, you're throwing away half the learning and you'll end up in a really bad place. And because we have this mindset of looking at the world as problems or looking at other people as problems, we try to solve tensions that should never be resolved. They just need to be held. Like classic example is sort of individual versus community. Is the individual's most important and we should, denigrate community if it gets in the way of the individual? Or is the community most important and we should denigrate the individual and get in the way of the community? Well, I would argue it's a tension. There is no solution. There's just different trade-offs at different times with different positive and negative consequences. And if you could just accept that it's a hard tension, you'll make better decisions than if you treat it as a problem to be solved. So that's
Ernie,
really,
you got a stream of consciousness here. It's raising so many points.
all right.
I'd
I'll
like
shut
to
up now and let you
discuss.
go.
No, I need to do sort of one thing at a time. And you've laid out about 6 major points. Let me throw in some. Now, first thing is this notion of solving the problem. In my Musk's Methods book, in the very beginning, I hope you have a copy. If not, I'll send it off now. But I've been accumulating it for about a half a year now. Musk is very clear about the fact that the requirement should always be challenged, no matter as being wrong and being capable of improvement, no matter who wrote it, no matter who they are, and no matter how smart they are. And I think he was indirectly saying, even if I give you a requirement, you have to challenge that requirement. He said the same thing about designs, but we'll get back to that. I've seen you probably know quotations from people. I'm trying to think of the one exactly, but they say that, was it Edison or Ford or somebody who said, if given an hour, maybe it was Einstein, given an hour to solve a problem, I'd use the first 55 minutes thinking about the problem before I use the last 5 minutes to actually solve it, or something like that. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, because
I got the quote for that one, since I'm looking it up.
Right. So
in an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 to 5 minutes sharpening the axe.
Yeah, something like, well, that's a
Anyway,
variation
yeah.
of it. But there's a lot of wisdom in that from my point of view, because I spent a lot of time looking at people's objectives, and they are invariably in dire need of reformulation to get it straight. They haven't got it straight, and they haven't learned at their Harvard business schools or whatever how to formulate a clear requirement. So a lot of what I write is exactly about how to do that. Okay? Anyway, that's the first thing. This whole notion of, before you solve the problem, why don't you clarify it so you're somewhat more sure that it is a correct formulation of the problem. Okay, that's number one. You mentioned something else. It was almost like number 6, something about prioritization and prioritizing doing things. And that's one of my favorite subjects too. But my prioritization methods are different from everybody else's, in that I say you need to prioritize in relation to the values and the costs that your choice would make. And I've written quite a lot about this in whole chapters in books like the Systems Engineering Architecture book, whole chapter on prioritization. And most people, the implication of that is, if you don't have a very clear value requirement specified, and people don't, you cannot prioritize with regard to that non-existent clear requirement. So you literally are disenabled from doing rational prioritization. Okay, I'm just I'll throw a few things back to you, but I could take a lot of the things you said and do similar things with them. Your turn.
I'll let Ernest weigh in if there's any particular thread he wants to pull on.
No, not really. I was thinking about the premise of the problem of the individual versus community. What the priority there, right? And I was listening to Tom right now, so I was thinking maybe it's always a conversation and a learning exercise. Like, okay, do I still belong to this community? Yeah, like something that you should ask yourself all the time. Like, has the community veered? Has the community's principles and goals veered so far away that I just don't belong anymore? And also, does the community do that on an individual basis? I think that's harder. Like, the community would then have to analyze all its members, what values and reputation, to see does each of the members still should still belong to the community. I think it's a two-sided issue, but I would give priority to the individual instead of the community. Like, it should be hard for a community to just kick people out unless they did something that is very drastic, right? Against the community, they violate some rules or whatever. But it should be easy for the individual to maybe evolve enough to try to create your own community, or just be community-less. To me, it's mostly because of the way that we are, right? We are internal, we're humans, and we have our own thoughts. And I think those should be prioritized, because those are, you're mainly an individual. Yeah, you have a community of close people, but you have, you think, you have your thoughts, your dreams, and you inside your head. But a community is harder for a community to get inside the head of its members. So because of that, I would give priority to the individual when it comes to community membership, or even community evolution. Maybe a community has, if one or more individuals start to evolve when it comes to their values, then the community might want to look into evolving with them. That's one choice. Or you could say, no, we're not with you guys, but you can split off and form your own community, sibling community, I guess, and do your own thing. And I think that's healthy. I think it comes from the view that an individual, maybe a CEO or a manager, can keep track of only a certain number of people, right? So that's why managers have just so many, I don't know, the top is like 40 or something like that, that you can keep directly track of, right? And then those people, they keep track of their own set of coordinates. That in a community is the same thing. A community that is so big that people cannot keep track of each other, it's too big. You have to have, communities should be small. You can form communities of communities, right? But your community zero for you should be really small, so that you can always keep track of, within your mind, keep track of your other community members.
Ernest, again, high level comment. You have a stream of thought and a large number of different opinions, suppositions, and I could only deal with it by, in a sense, recording each step and discussing each step. Otherwise, because I would challenge each step just on principle anyway. But as a starter, I refer you to my stakeholder engineering book, which you either have a copy of or I will send one now. But stakeholders are, in a sense, similar to communities, though not identical. And a lot of those things I think about communities is in the stakeholder book, which is quite detailed, about the values of stakeholders and things like that. So I don't know if we want to start that discussion now, but I just say, if we were to have a serious discussion, you'd have to take me one small step at a time and discuss it, and then maybe move on from there. Do you have shall I send a copy of the stakeholder engineering book?
Pretty sure we've seen that one before.
Yeah, I think I'm
gonna make the same claim that I remember about it last time. Let me tell you if you think it's different. Is that what I remember about it is that it sort of starts from the assumption that we have a well-defined entity, which is the context we're using to make this decision. And all of us are in that entity, and we're trying to understand who are the stakeholders relative to the decision we want to make. Is that
Wait,
fair, or am I missing something?
Let me stop you right there. You mentioned that we assume we're in some well-defined entity. Now, I wouldn't let you get beyond that point, because I would
Okay.
not make such an assumption. I would make the assumption that we probably are not in a well-defined entity. It's got all kinds of borders and things happening we know nothing about, and will not know until it's too late. You know, so we have to actually, I would assume we're in a potentially, or for sure, chaotic entity. That is, as Ernest just said, the communities may be changing their values and fall outside of what you thought they were. Okay, so I mean, so that statement alone deserves more careful consideration, whether we are in a well-defined entity or a chaotic, roughly defined, but not well-defined one.
Right, because the interesting reason that I bring that up, and maybe this is 30 minutes, and let me see if I can suggest this as a sort of core topic for us to discuss, is what does it mean to be part of a community when it comes to making a decision? Because I think this is an interesting one for a bunch of reasons. Let me just say,
let's write that down, and we can do that, you know.
Okay, right. So what does it mean to?
Are you writing in the chat?
As part of a community, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because this is the thing we talked about way back, I think the end of last year was, you know, the dream was that Datocracy becomes this certification for communities. So we can go to an open source or a Web3 community and say, you know, hey, let's use this lens to judge how healthy of a community you are. Or these are the attributes that characterize your community. So people look and say, oh yeah, this is, you know, the X kind of community, the Y kind of community. And I think the thing that makes this hard is that we have, and actually there's two things that make it hard. There's an intellectual thing that makes it hard because there's many different dimensions you can use to judge a community. But there's also this emotional thing that makes it hard, that people who are part of the exact same community and have had a very similar information stream about what makes up the community can have radically different interpretations about what's good and bad of the community. For example, here in the US, in the last week, we have had Congress holding a series of hearings on January 6th.
Yep, we've been following
human beings who have sat side by side on the couch and watched the exact same set of hearings have vastly different emotional reactions. And to me, that's the interesting, hard problem of community decision-making, is that, you know, it helps to have a common set of information, but that's not sufficient.
Now, Ernie, since you've done it again, even with this small sentence, you've run off with a whole series of things when even the fundamental question needs, let's say, better definition. For example, make decisions. Now, there's a difference between contributing information to a decision and making the decision or taking it, you know, making the, okay, let we decide is quite different from, I don't value that. Okay, so we've got this whole idea of making decision needs to be sussed out and defined before that sentence makes any sense. And then part of a community needs to be sussed out because you know, you have officially belonging to a community, like I go to that church all the time, or I always vote for that party. But take something, a nurse in Norway and a nurse in San Francisco still are part of a community known as nurses, but they don't even know each other. Okay, so the whole concept of being part, how much of a part in what sense? And so, long story short, even though what does it mean? What are we looking for there? Like, does it mean that it's a good thing or a bad thing or commitment? I mean, okay, so three parts of that one sentence need illumination before we could have a sensible discussion. Otherwise, the three of us will be discussing in any direction we assume that thing means.
Yeah, the last example you mentioned is nurses. I wouldn't call that community, even though that's the name that we use. I wouldn't call even a group. That's a cohort, And
Yeah, but
right?
Ernest, even if you don't, they might say, you know, a
Because
nurse is a nurse
I've
and
had
they're
this
part of my
happen.
community.
I can make abstract statements about the medical profession,
Mhm.
and my
Yeah.
father will get offended because he feels like his community identity is being attacked.
That's interesting. Yeah. So
Right. So there's this weird thing that anything that. So let me actually give you a concrete scenario which tries to reduce the number of variables. And let me
Good.
see if this will give you a more focused way to riff on it. So I have
Okay.
this idea of a service I want to provide that I'm calling a challenge ring. And the idea is that I come up with like a key question on an important topic. And I advertise publicly saying, hey, I'm convening a group to meet publicly on the internet to discuss this question. Like, it could be very narrow, it could be broad. Like, for example, I wanted to do this after COVID hit. There was a joke, I don't know if you saw this one, Ernest, that the scariest thing about COVID-19 is that it looks like a JIRA ticket.
say that again.
The scariest thing about COVID-19 is that it looks like a JIRA ticket.
Oh,
Right? And that, like, you know, what's going to happen with COVID-20 and COVID-21? And that made me think, well, that's because we didn't really deal with COVID-18 and COVID-17, right? All the previous things, and I said, like, it would be fun to get a bunch of technology people to do a blameless post-mortem on how we ended up with COVID-19, right? And I still think it would have been a great idea, but, you know, so the idea being like, say, okay, and say like, we want to have a discussion where we say, okay, this is like, so this would be, you know, or we could even do it now. So like, I want to call for a group of people to come together to answer the question, what have we learned from the pandemic that will help us prevent the next one? So that's the challenge, right? And so the idea is that you would publish some ground rules ahead of time that people have to agree to, and you would have some structure for the discussion that people will come together saying, okay, I care about this question. That's how they self-select in. And I, at least in principle, agree to this structure for, you know, it's going to take, you know, 2 days of 8 hours each or whatever, in person or virtual. And that would be, you're creating this community under that constraint with this particular challenge, this definition of done as the output. And so the interesting question to me is, what are the design considerations? What are the preconditions and the structure you could put on it such that you could maximize the chances of this team coming up with a useful answer to that challenge, or responding constructively to that challenge? Does that give you enough constraints to work with, Tom?
The shorter the formulation, the better.
Okay.
But and there were, in a sense, there were too many words or ideas there.
All right. I set a question, I invite people, I give them a format, and then, you know, what are the design characteristics? How do I optimize their time within that format?
Yeah.
Or how do we just give the optimal format?
Okay, let me take it. Let me try. I have a problem with every 2 words you have.
Okay.
I invite people. I've got to discuss each one, or I don't know the meaning of invite and people and formats.
Would being more concrete make that easier for you?
Well, no, but let me try something.
Okay.
I think what we're really asking is what constitutes good decision making. You know, what constitutes, what are the characteristics, and that, by the way, is the subject of a book I've written called Decisioneering this year.
What a beautiful term. However did you think of it?
I don't know. Just but let me let's see. Just I'll send it to you guys.
Let me actually make it a slightly stronger question than that. So we have the idea of decisioneering. We'll go with that term.
I'm not getting a fair chance.
Okay, sorry, I apologize.
Throw in, even throw in decision, but I'll send you the decisioneering book so it gets sent. And now, okay, here, here. In my book, good decisions look like this. They emanate from a well-defined and but not perfectly defined and reasonably well agreed to problem statement. Now, if you don't have that, everything else is a waste. You're answering the wrong question. Okay, so there's no. I'm back with Musk's statement. You know, you need to challenge those requirements and keep on pushing the envelope towards better and better. But it is never perfect. It's never complete, but it can be damned good. And most people have atrociously bad as the norm. Okay, so point one is let's call it damned good problem statement. Okay, and agree with it. Now, point two, what is a good solution or set of strategies or architecture, or call it what you like, but answer to that. And I would say it is we call it a strategy that has a reasonable likelihood of giving a good or reasonably correct answer. And in any case, it has the characteristic that it can be modified as we get feedback in the implementation of it, so that it gets better and better and better at answering the question, and can even help us reformulate our problem. Was that too many words? I can simplify that. Good problem formulation with reasonable solution architecture is, in other words, nothing is perfect, but both of these need to be a hell of a lot better than is 99% of everything I see on the planet. In other words, I'm claiming the bigger problem is we have atrocious habits in formulating our objectives or requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Simple example, I wrote a whole book about the United Nations 17 sustainability goals,
Yeah,
and how bad they are in excruciating detail. And that's trying to solve the problems of world hunger and health and everything like that. You know, that's a really big problem, but it's atrociously badly formulated. And we don't even seem to recognize how bad we are. I mean, one thing is we're bad. That's my claim. I can prove it. I've written a lot about it logically and systematically, right? But most people don't even seem to realize how bad we are. They think this is okay. This is good enough for the United Nations or whatever the occasion is. Okay, so big problem. We are atrocious at formulating problems, and we don't even seem to realize how bad we are, even well-educated people. Okay,
right.
and number two, we're actually atrocious at solving multidimensional problems. We don't even realize we should solve multidimensional problems. We
Right.
don't even bother to identify the top 10 critical dimensions of a problem we're going to solve. Anyway, I'm rambling on.
Okay, no, I thought that was good. I took some notes. I think I will accept that framework for now. Let me raise an issue which I have found.
By the way, I sent you the Decisioneering book.
Yeah,
so
I think you sent it to me
right.
after, when we first talked about that on this podcast or on this channel.
Right.
And I have a hard stop at 2:00, so so this is the interesting thing that I've been running into in just sort of data workflow stuff in my day job, which has really made me rethink how I look at these sorts of communal decision-making activities. And that is, in the data community, it's all about trying to get the right data and having clear definition of terms and a rigorous, repeatable way of generating that data. But then I've been with some friends who've really been questioning, well, is the goal to get good data, or is the goal to get good decisions? Or is the goal to get good decisions, or is the goal to have good results? And one of the things that I have found that trips me up a lot is that people have either very different or very limited models about the, I don't even have the right word for this. Maybe you could help me with this. the affordances, the kinds of things that can be done. Like, for example, when you're decorating a house, I look at the walls as a fixed, but I have a friend who's a contractor who says, oh yeah, we'll just tear down this wall and put up another one, no big deal. Like, to me, tearing down a wall is a huge deal, but to him it's no big deal. Conversely, I have friends who say, yeah, we have to train all these people to do this. Oh no, I could write a script to do that in 5 minutes. So the Technic, the techniques, the things that can be done are our Technic shapes our ethic, I think is the premise, is that what we think is possible is the thing that even determines the questions worth asking. And I just know that in my usual approach to decision making and the practices that I followed, that uncovering of what people think is possible and impossible is profoundly important, but difficult for me to wrap my head around or wrap the
By the way, you
around.
have several lovely pairs of words I'd like to discuss. By the way, I tried to shoot an answer in the chat to your earlier question about what our goals should be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now our goal should be to get good decisions which match real stakeholder needs, even if we do not initially know what those needs are. That's my most profound insight into what we should be aiming for.
And let me repeat what I heard you say to make sure I interpreted the way you meant it. Is
Right.
that we need to embed our decision making in a context that ensures we're continually iterating toward a better match of our activity
Good.
with our objective.
True. Exactly where I'm intending it. Yeah. So there, in other words, we have to assume imperfect knowledge of what the needs will be, because it's not a matter of are, it is will be. Okay. And we have to have something iterating to constantly try to learn better what those needs are and are becoming, so that the solution can be adapted to what will be. It's the match with what will be that is the interesting solution, not with the match with what is.
So I summarized that. Ooh, let's see if we can get this down to a single sentence, or at least a phrase. Iteratively matching our imperfect activity with our evolving objectives.
Oh, goody. You're good. I like that.
Dang, I feel like I should stop now that I got something that Tom agreed with.
Claim
Chris,
victory.
any thoughts there?
Claim victory.
Yeah, you both put a finger on that. Ernest first with, this is complicated, especially with your example of the house and the architect saying, yeah, we can tear this down, we can tear down this wall. But you with, no, if the house is built, it has walls, so they're there for a reason. Well, so your perspective depends on your objective. It's your house, you wanna be comfortable in it. Your experience, the architect has, is knowledgeable about building construction and design and all that. So the architect knows, oh yeah, this wall is not a low load bearing wall, so we can move it or take it out, no problem. Another wall might be a problem because it's load bearing, and there's all these things that the architect knows that will impact in the decision of whether the wall should be taken or not. But then outside of that, then there's your decision. Do I need more space or whatever? Then there's your wife. So we have a multi-dimensional problem that I think we need technology to solve. Like something that you can pull your views on that says, okay, this is Ernest's perspective and his goals. And these are his wife's perspectives and goals. You have to get those together. Then the architects and the people that the architect works with. And so it is just like finance. right? We have tools to analyze graphs and histories and make predictions. We need some sort of tool that to make humans into, and I heard this word, techno-sapient, so that when we think about this problem, we have technology to back us up and help us, so that you can say, oh, yeah, this wall can be moved because of the architect's view, whatever. But then who the decider, which is you and your wife, maybe even your kids, are the deciders of, okay, because of our objectives and what we think we're going to need in the future. This goes back to Tom's. We can't predict what we will actually need. We can think and make an informed prediction of what we think we want, right? It can all change, but you work towards that prediction, and so you accommodate your priorities and resources to match the needs that you will have in the future, that you think you will have in the future, right?
Good, Ernest. We're aligned now.
Okay.
By the way, I thought I'd dig up my, I've always summarized everything in a set of principles. And so I dug up the decisioneering principles from the book I just sent you. And what do we have? 8 minutes left. Can I try a few of these just as discussion things?
Sure.
Let me try one. All decisions can be improved and should be continuously improved after initial drafts. Okay, this is very similar to Musk's, question the design at all time. And okay, then all decisions need to be treated as a hypothesis until disproven. I'm not sure whether I mean proven or disproven, but I don't think it matters. Okay, that all solutions are a hypothesis, and we need then to say, okay, let's try to prove or disprove that this is a good solution. Number 3, the basis for decisions need to be documented, written down, not oral, traceable, who said it, responsible, who will take responsibility for that, reviewable, can be quality control that is being, for example, unambiguous and clear, etc. And number 4, even initially successful decisions need to be reversible or adjustable as circumstances change. I'm reading more and more about Jeff Bezos and Amazon these days. I'm into my 3rd book now. And he talks about single door decisions where you walk through and you can't get back, and 2-door or double door decisions where you make the decision, but if it turns out to be a bummer, you can quickly revert. And these are essentially different because one you can make with less risk of getting stuck. Okay, I'll leave it there, but leave you the idea that this set of principles might be a good framework for discussing decision making, because that's what I intended to be.
All right, let me get back to the original question I was trying to ask you about 10 minutes ago, because I think it feeds in here. Like, I think these principles in abstract make an awful lot of sense. I think the reason it's difficult to put into practice, and maybe I need a catchy phrase for this, let's call it the anti-uncertainty principle. And the thesis is that the ability to hold on to uncertainty, our capacity for sustaining uncertainty, is actually our scarcest resource and the limiting factor in our ability to make good decisions, because humans naturally revert to binary thinking to reduce cognitive load. People just want to say, yes, it's over with. Yes, I'm done. This is good. This is bad. I'm in, you're out. And so we can move on with the rest of our lives. And being able to sustain the, well, it's mostly there, it's not there yet, is a constant balance against the anti-uncertainty principle. Would you agree with that?
Let's see, my first intuition is no, which makes it more fun. Okay, now I'm not afraid of uncertainty. I believe that we need to arrive at a first draft hypothesis of what the solution is. We assume there are massive uncertainties at all time. And what we need to do then is incrementally and step by step try to resolve the uncertainties by testing, piloting, and other tactics to get information about how well it's working. So for me, uncertainty is a natural, pervasive condition. I'm not worried about it
Of
at
the
all.
world, or about of your own thinking.
Everything. Okay. But certainly in any problem solving or decision making, that's the, this is uncertainty, massive uncertainty is pervasive, natural, and unavoidable. So what we can do is come up with a hypothesis. This solution is a good solution, and we can start rather than implementing it massively at great cost, 8 years, $8 billion. What I do in my EVO method is chip away at it, try to, as a scientist would, by testing it to see what things are more certain, what things are less certain, and where they are. So my EVO method is all about.
Right. I don't think you're actually disagreeing with me. So it makes me think you didn't hear what I was trying to say.
Oh, that's possible. I'm sort of panicking because of the time here.
Yeah, well, but the idea is that like that's what we should do, and very few people would disagree in principle that that's what we should do. But they'll say, "Oh, we've only got 3 minutes left. We have to make a decision so we can get on to the 1,500 other problems that we're dealing with in our lives." And so I was saying, like, in order to be able to implement your method, the hard part is creating the right safe spaces where people are willing to embrace that uncertainty and sustain the conversation long enough to actually get to a reasonable solution and leave space to improve upon it later. That's the idea. And that there's this natural human tendency to want to just get it over with and move on.
One medicine I use, there's a well-known economic principle whose name I can't remember just now, but it basically says if you don't take risk, you can't earn a huge profit.
Yeah,
so,
alpha and beta, yeah.
Riskiness is a prerequisite for succeeding economically.
And were you just equating risk with uncertainty?
No, let's see. It's
maybe, because they're both volatility.
Oh, was I equating risk with uncertainty?
Equating risk with uncertainty.
Yeah, I was being informal about it, giving our time constraints.
But that's an interesting thesis, using all the language of, I was thinking about the, anyway, that's good.
But I have defined all those words in my language glossary. So my, I have to look them both up to check and see whether I've decided they're synonyms or not.
All right. And my argument is that, well, it depends on the technic, how you're going to implement them, that determines whether it's the right definition, because
yes,
I've come to believe there is no action independent information. It's non-commutative. Anyway, I think I'm going to have to run now to my meeting. This has been fun. I think we actually said a few things of consensus and interest, and who knows where we'll be next month. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Bye. The last question, Ernest, did you read my blog post?
No.
It was all about what happens if you want to try and design a community that has those attributes, and who gets kicked out and who gets left in.
Oh,
let me know what you think. All right.
I'll read it.
Bye-bye.